Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. And as always, I've forgotten to turn off the sounds on my phone before I started, so now I have. So this week we're talking about judgment, and we've talked about judgment in so many different forms before. In fact, Sarah C. Avignoni and I did our pilot course for our Adventures in Wonderland in February on forgiveness, which is actually the fourth course of the program. But it was piloted because forgiveness was such a big, important topic. And so the interesting thing is underneath forgiveness is judgment. Because if we didn't judge, we would have nothing to forgive, right? And so what we tend to think about is judgment as being, the judge and the gavel and triggers and all kinds of stuff. And we talk about it in context with the ego, in context with being a separation-based energy or emotion. And it's true because when we judge something, we're judging it. We're deciding whether we think it's good or bad, right? So as soon as we say I'm judging something as good or bad, I think it's, good morning, Anne. It's, as soon as I say that I'm judging something as good or bad, well then all of a sudden, it has now become a basis of duality, right? So from the expanded consciousness, we look at things in terms of the whole picture, the symphony, how it all fits together, because it does all perfectly fit together. And then we don't look at when we, when we start to judge, that we fall into the ego. No matter how, we can even fall into an expanded version of the ego versus there's different levels of the ego, just as much as we have the levels of our, different levels of consciousness, and ego is included in that. So what happens is, it's funny because Sarah does say, I don't know if Sarah's here yet. She usually sits in Sarah's my partner on my Monday podcast, Ascended World, and on the programs that we put out and stuff on the Ascended World page. So what Sarah says, which I love, is, when you look at origination myths, right? Especially the one about the Garden of Eden and, the fall from the garden and all that kind of stuff. Yep, there's Sarah. There you are. And she says, really, she wonders if judgment was really what the fall was about, was creating judgment, which is really the creation of duality. Because as soon as we create duality, there's a me and a not me. So when we create that idea of a me and a not me, then we create judgment, because we start deciding if something is not me, if that's not good, right? Because we believe that good is what me is, right? And what's not me is not good. And so when we start from that origination, then we got to think, well, everything we've created here in these earth dimensions have a basis of judgment in them, because we always think of judgment as being the negative part of judging somebody, that they're bad, that they've done something wrong, blah, 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 blah. But then we forget that there's the positive side too. But the positive side is, oh, well, that's good. So I strive to do something good because that makes me a good person, but that's a judgment too, right? Instead of just saying we're all divine, we're all part of the whole thing. So interestingly, we've been having this conversation a lot. And we talk about it in consciousness all the time, about resolving judgment on what we need to, on what to do to see things from expanded perspective and all that kind of stuff. And yet we don't realize how deeply embedded almost every decision we make here is based in judgment. And it's funny because the round robin discussion came up with my husband a couple of days ago, and it's we think, so let's just look at what goes, we'll take it apart as to what goes on inside our heads, right? So we think something, or we feel something, all right? So say, we feel something. So what you do with that feeling has to do with how you judge that feeling. So if you judge that feeling as bad, you'll repress it. or hide it, right, which is repressing it, or put it aside. If we judge it as good, we'll express it. If we judge it as limiting, if we judge it as, I don't want to say bad, like when we say, oh, well, okay, if we say, here's that. I'm very sad, but if I express my sadness, whoever I'm with that's causing the sadness will then feel bad, right? And so I don't want them to feel bad because whatever, right? Or sometimes we're the other way, as I feel sad because somebody da da da. And so, like, as long as we're in this externalization mode of looking at other people and value, and really, like, what it comes down to is, well, I want that person to like me, and or I only want them to get so upset, or I want them to pay more attention to me, or I want them to do this, or I want them to do that. So in a way, it's manipulation, and we're not even conscious of it. Yes, uncomfortable. If it's uncomfortable, like we talk about all this stuff, and it's like, okay, so we think, okay, well, I'm not going to say this because it's going to make them uncomfortable. It's going to make them, right, uncomfortable is actually a good word for that, Sarah, because that's typically what we do. It'll make them uncomfortable. It'll put a wedge in our interaction. It will damage the way the person sees me, and then they won't love me, or or whatever. And so we go through all these things, and there's all these judgments that go on in our heads. Like, we had this huge explosion go on, my husband and I, and it all came down from this thought of having a judgment about a thought of his own that he then projected onto me. He projected onto me, judging him for it, right, and then rejecting him, and it was like 4 different steps. It was sort of crazy. But this is what we do all the time. It's having a thought that you want to share with somebody, and then you think they're going to reject you for that thought. And so therefore, you then judge them for the potential of them rejecting you for that thought, because you are so in defense mode, because you are judging yourself, and then you judge yourself even more. And then there's this round robin. It just goes around in these circles, right? And so here's the thing. All this happened, and I had never been a part of any of it until I inserted myself and created the explosion. So, and it's funny because I was like, when we started having this conversation, and he actually brought up, said, this is probably a good topic for you to talk about. I'm like, you're right. It is, because we talk about judgment a lot. But what happens is we just put so much into this, like, we judge so much in our heads, right? And we're judging what somebody's. So think about it. He was judging me, judging him for something he wanted to tell me but didn't. And I never even knew what he was thinking. And I did not judge him for it when I did finally insert myself in the whole thing and found it all out. But like, all of this stuff carried this huge amount of gunk of just self-sabotage and all kinds of stuff. And it was like, once all that underneath got cleared away, it was like, oh, well, look at how big I made that in my head, right? And we do that all the time. We sit there and think of all the energy that was put into that one situation. And we do this every day. We go, okay, well, if I do this, then, this will make this person happy, or this will make this person unhappy, or, there's so many, like, I just can't even begin to tell you, like, everything, all the things we think all have these things that are connected into judgment. And we create so much energy around them. And so they are the foundation of how we propel ourselves, because the judgment is, oh, what am I trying to do? Like, to make myself feel good. At the end of the day, the more we get into this consciousness of not only the forgiveness circle, which is program 4, course 4 of the Wonderland program over on Ascended World, which will be relaunching next month. We did the pilot back in February. But the circle of forgiveness, as we have experienced in consciousness, is, apology, forgiveness, acceptance, embracing, love, and gratitude, right? So we go full circle around from blame, externalization, to gratitude for the situation. Because when we see things from the bigger picture, when we forgive and apologize in both directions, and then we look at the bigger picture in acceptance, then we start to love the whole situation because we see the perfection of it, and we can have gratitude for it being there. And which is how I ended up with that whole situation. But huge amounts of gratitude, because then you start seeing the bigger picture without the judgment of saying, oh, well, this is terrible, this is catastrophic, this could ruin our relationship, this could ruin our marriage, this could ruin everything, da 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 da. And like, you could just go down that path. And then you've decided that this is a catastrophic thing without you ever saying a word or ever doing something that's in your heart or coming from the center of you, because we put so many layers around it. So when we talk about authenticity, right, it's coming to this place of sitting in a space where I am who I am, or I am where I am. I am the best version of me right now in this moment. And when we can do that in every moment and be present in that and say, you know what, this is who I am, this is where I am. And when we do that, we stop and we take the self-responsibility. Course 5, which is September, self-responsibility. We take the self-responsibility for the creation of our reality in this way, and knowing that it all comes from me. So by the way, all of that gets changed as I continue working on myself to come back to my own divinity, to come back to my authenticity, so that I can sit in a place of saying, you know what, I am perfect as I am, because I fit perfectly into the symphony that I created, because it's all me, right? And I've created this reality perfectly. I've created this whole symphony perfectly. And when I get to that acceptance, right? And see, that's almost a forgiveness and apology circle too, that creation. To say, when I come to that acceptance, it's like, okay, well then I have nothing to lose. I have nothing that is outside of me. There is no not me. All the not me perception is simply a perception. And so we can shift ourselves into a place of saying, you know, this is where I am. And standing in that truth in a place of self-love without blame or projection. Now that's one of the biggest steps. That's part of the big self-responsibility thing, is to get into a place of not projecting our feelings, our judgments onto others, and just taking full ownership of them ourselves. Because when we do that, then we stop pulling ourselves back through judgment. We stop getting lost in the sea of judgments in that big round robin of going around and around and around and never, getting ourselves stuck. Because that's what we do. We get ourselves stuck through all of these interrelated judgments that hold us back. So when we can do that, it makes it so much easier. Because, for example, it was really interesting. I had something last night come up. And it's funny, come to think of it, this really had to do with that. It was like one of my kids, who are both adults, by the way, and they do live at home, but they work full time. They're done with college, all that kind of stuff. One of my kids texted and said, it would be a good thing. Wouldn't it be a good idea to get good berries, which is like frozen custard that we love, right? And it's over by where we have our kung fu class. And she's like, well, if you, and she doesn't go. And she's like, well, so if y'all have the inkling, to stop, then could you, right? And honestly, I wasn't looking at my phone at the time. I was in the middle of a conversation. I heard it from my husband and daughter because we have the family string going on. And I said, well, all I said out loud was, well, we'll see what we're like when we get out of class, right? So we got out of class and we were tired. It was like 9:30 and we're like, just want to go home. It's not on the way. It's like 15 minutes out of the way. So we're like, okay, no, just want to go home. Got home, and then my oldest had this fit, 25 years old, had this fit. And because we didn't go, and it was like, well, you just said if you had the inkling. I didn't feel like that precipitated a whole bunch of thought. I didn't think it was like, oh, you must go or whatever. And I just didn't feel like it. And she was getting so bent because I wasn't apologetic. I was just like, okay, it is what it is. But there was all this judgment, and it turned into this like big explosion from her. And I'm just like sort of scratching my head going, then go get your own. Then go get your own. They're open till like midnight. Go get it if you want it that bad. So it's like, and in her head, I know she had all these judgments of things that were externalizations. Because a lot of times, well, if this person cared, if this person, like would tend to me, that would be like these things aren't even conscious, and they're all judgments. And it's like, well, if this person cared means they don't care, which means that, I'm going to be mad at them because they don't care. Like, and it's just like, and we do that all the time over really minor, unimportant things. Yeah, I get the you're so selfish judgment. Exactly. And it's like, yeah, well, guess what? Y'all are adults and y'all have your own income and you still live in the house, and that's fine. And I'm fine with that. But you can get in the car and get your own dang custard, just saying. But I just honestly, and I didn't think that until then she started judging me, right? So then I started judging her, right? And it was like, okay, then I stepped back and I was like, yeah, no, whatever. It's her thing. It's not mine. I'm not going to take it on. I'm not going to make it a thing. And in fact, that's, like I said, that's sort of infused and sensed it more because we don't realize how much we play off of each other's judgments too. We get into these conversations and we go, all the time. One of the things I saw, there's a meme that there's a spiritual friend that I love a lot of the stuff she posts, but she put this meme out there yesterday that I thought was funny. It's like, me is, oh, well, be nice to everybody because you don't know what they're going through. Right. Also me, is like, like, all right, you jerk, turn off your turn signal, like in the car. That wasn't quite the words in the meme, but it was funny because I was like, that's what we do all the time. It's like, and that's okay. So let's not judge ourselves for that either. Like, we can laugh at ourselves about it. It's to be conscious. The whole point of this discussion is for us to start being conscious of those judgments that go on in our heads that cause us to perpetuate self-limiting behavior and perpetuate limitations and exclusions and the habit of judging before we even engage in something, right? And what really helps with that is getting to a place of real comfort in your guidance. It always comes back down to that. I always talk about worthiness and guidance, two things, right? When we get to a place of such trust in our guidance that it becomes automatic to say, hey, yeah, is this for me? Yay or nay? Is this for me to do? Is this for me to be right now? Yay or nay, right? I didn't feel like the whole thing was important. Got that. And so last night, so I just didn't even think about it, right? Nor did I feel guilty about it, no matter how badly, like my daughter tried. But, it was like, it's so inconsequential in the bigger picture. And so, and consequences are perception and judgment too. It's a judgment perception too, by the way. So see what I'm saying? All these little things are so tiny. And as we get more and more conscious, we still try to hide them in the cracks and crevices. And we don't realize how many decisions that we make truly based on, what we think somebody else is thinking, right? Oh, and yeah, that was part of the conversation too. It's like, sometimes we get into conversation, right? And because of past, which is not being present, right? So it's because of past discussions. It's because of past experiences. Like, we then bring the history of old discussions into a present discussion, even if it's with different people, but maybe it's the same topic, right? And so when we do that, then we're putting judgments and suppositions in and we get into a certain stance, and sometimes it's indignance, right? So we sometimes will start out a conversation, interaction, or communication from this place of indignance, right? And we then start shutting down our openness before we even start the conversation and the communication. So that's what that we were talking about, conversation that there was in a party that I was at, that there was amongst a group of people. And once it was like first, it started, we could tell one party was like really a little up in arms about something from past discussions, and then people were just curious, but they were just curious about something. And so it was just, it evolved into a really good conversation once both sides realized, okay, nobody is ridiculing or judging. People are simply asking because they were curious. And a lot of times conversations get shut down because of that. But that's what I'm talking about, is all these things. It's like, if we open our hearts instead of our minds, right? If we open our hearts first and let our minds follow, instead of leading with our minds and then deciding whether we're going to open our heart, right? That's a completely different energy. And it is a lot easier when we start with an open heart to say, okay, all is perfect in this moment. I take full responsibility for my reality, and I'm going to not only hear what the person is saying, but I'm also going to hear what their energy is saying, because the energy is the true communication. So if we get stuck in the mind, which is where judgments all lie, and they do lie on top of it, when they get stuck there, then we never fully open our heart, and we never fully hear or communicate and connect, right? And that actually prevents us from really being in that place of oneness and wholeness and connection. So actually, when we do that, we help ourselves and we help each other, because then we leave the space open for others to open their heart, and lead with the heart and their consciousness versus their mind or the ego. And so it's for us to really be observant within ourselves. Because, by the way, as soon as we start judging, right, first of all, as Sarah and I are talking about this month in our guidance course, Guidance into Hidden Messages course, triggers, right, are usually set off. Well, they are set off by judgments, right? Triggers are the number one message that we're trying to give ourselves, because if we're triggered to judge somebody or something in front of us, then it is something that's inside of ourselves. And then it's a clue for us to turn to guidance and say, what is that? What is that about? It's not about the other person. It's not about the other people present. It's all about me. So if it's all about me, which it is, and I create all this, and this is all me, what am I reminding myself of? It takes the sting out of the judgment. It takes the it takes the whole energy of vomiting it up. I don't want to say vomiting. Shooting the arrow to somebody else, because it allows you to hold on to it and turn it around as the mirror. And sometimes it is very uncomfortable. Sometimes we just say, yeah, nope, don't want to look at that. But the more we don't want to look at it, right, the bigger the trigger it is, the bigger the message it is. So when we can step back in observance and see the ego having the trigger, and yet not engage in it or get sucked in, see that this is a very fine line of tweaking and refinement in our consciousness, then we can utilize those judgments to actually be a tool to help us in our consciousness and remembrance, and reminding ourselves what is it within myself that I am judging this other person with, because I am judging something that's reflecting back to me, not them, because they're me anyway, so it doesn't even matter. So when we do that, and it's interesting, it's funny, I'm just seeing whatever, it's funny, I just had a download about my daughter's thing with the custard. Because the reflection is, to me, so what is it that I'm judging within myself? Because, I'm thinking, oh, that's sort of childish, right? 25 years old and having a temper tantrum about, frozen custard. And I thought, and I was like, well, it's interesting, because yesterday morning in meditation, I was like, I've been going through this exercise of incorporating all the elements of myself that I've yet to allow to be reincorporated, right? So the things that I've kept in the cracks and crevices and the deepest parts of the shadow, welcoming them all back in with open arms and love and acceptance and gratitude, like that whole forgiveness apology thing. So I've been doing that. And then yesterday in meditation, I was on the playground. So it's funny that that happened last night because now it sort of makes sense. But I was on the playground, leaning on a rail or whatever, and there was a child sitting next to me on a bench. And I recognized that child as that was a piece of me. It wasn't my inner child. It wasn't like the full inner child. It was a piece that I had pushed away. And I'm still not sure clearly what that was about, but obviously that was a message from my daughter. See, I had to talk it out here. Because the child said, "Why did you leave me here? I feel left out. I feel like you abandoned me." And I apologized and I'd asked if I would play with it. And I said, even better, I'll give you a hug. And when I hugged it, it incorporated back into me. So obviously that reflection, it feels like the reflection of my child here having that temper tantrum has something to do with some kind of abandonment. Well, which is something to look at. See how that works. See how you can process that around. And it can be something that's very minute, but sometimes it takes that kind of reflection to give us the moment to pause and observe. And that is all we can say. Like, we don't judge yourself for judging. Like, that's the joke. The joke is like, I was talking about that meme. Yeah. Like, I can do 90% of the time in a place of acceptance and non-judgment, and then I have judgment, right? I don't even think it's 90%. We have it so embedded. We don't even, like when you look in the mirror and you say, "Oh, I look good today." That's a judgment. Well, you're always divine. You're always perfect and amazing. If you look at somebody, and it's not that it's bad to judge. It's just something to look at as what you're appreciating, what you are, what you're looking at, what you are, what's reflecting back to you. And that's on the good side as well as the good side as well as the bad side. Yeah. So many different facets of this. And if we start to take it out of autopilot, because that's really what we have, is an autopilot all the time. If we start to take it out of autopilot, then we can get to a place of saying, "Oh, I see this, and I see this as a trigger that caused me to judge. And what's underneath that, and what's there for me to look at and resolve and accept and embrace and have gratitude for inside of me." Because then we start shifting at the speed of thought, faster than the speed of thought. It's crazy how awesome it is. But these are the tweaks and the little tiny points that are so important to really help us leap in like crazy warp speeds, right? Into what we are allowing ourselves to embrace again within ourselves in remembrance. What we're allowing ourselves to be in, what we want to call enlightenment or awakened or self-realized or whatever, all these terms. It doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. It's coming to a place of the realization of your own divinity and your perfection and the wholeness of creation that you have as the reality around you, which comes from within. So, big baby steps, because it's not really a baby step. Because when we master this judgment thing to that place of seeing it, observing it, using it as a tool, and it just accelerates our consciousness. I can't even describe how fast it has changed me in looking at that, especially the past several weeks. So look at that within your life. Look at what you're judging. Look at what you judge in other people and your thoughts, and what you're not saying or not doing, or because you're thinking somebody needs to judge you better, or they need to like you, or they need to approve, or all that kind of stuff. And start looking at all that, and then what comes from, like, see if you can turn that mirror around and say, well, what is that coming from? Like, for me, is it an externalization? That means that I don't believe I'm worthy of being loved, or, being love as I am. It really does sort of help turn everything back into the present moment. And it just all becomes about me. And you, because you're me. So on that, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for joining me. Have a great week. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Shift. Bye.